more like a line drawn in the ground. If you target America's children, you will be pursued. That was the message. But the real story is bigger than one operation, bigger than one FBI director, and bigger than one headline. Because when Kash Patel's FBI announced Operation Iron Pursuit, it was not just reporting a number. It was sending a signal to predators, traffickers, online exploiters, and anyone hiding behind screens, encrypted accounts, fake identities, and jurisdictional gaps. The signal was simple. The chase is not over. But here is the part that should make every viewer stop and pay attention. In cases like this, the number itself can almost become a distraction. 350 arrests sounds massive. 200 children located sounds like victory. And in many ways, it is. But behind those numbers is a darker question. How did so many children become reachable to predators in the first place? That is the mystery no press conference can fully settle. Because an arrest is the end of one chapter. It is not the beginning of the story. Before an arrest, there is a child contacted, groomed, threatened, exploited, transported, filmed, manipulated, or trapped. Before a takedown, there is a system predators believe they could beat. Before a headline, there is silence. And Operation Iron Pursuit forces America to look directly at that silence. According to official announcements, this was a nationwide enforcement effort led by the FBI with the Department of Justice and partners across local, state, federal, and community agencies. It targeted alleged child exploitation offenders. The operation was conducted across all 56 FBI field offices. It resulted in more than 350 arrests and the location of more than 200 child victims. Those are not ordinary figures. They describe a national threat. And that is why this story cannot be treated like just another crime update. It is a warning about what law enforcement says is happening beneath the surface of normal American life, in suburbs, in cities, in small towns, online, in private messages, in hidden networks, in places where parents think their children are safe because the danger is not standing outside the house. It is already inside the phone. This is where the story becomes more disturbing. Because the FBI did not describe this as one isolated group, one city, or one criminal ring. The operation involved alleged sex traffickers, abusers, kidnappers, and people accused of manufacturing, possessing, distributing, or using child sexual abuse material. That range matters. It means the threat was not one kind of criminal behavior. It was an ecosystem. And ecosystems survive when nobody sees the full picture. One predator may be looking for contact. Another may be trading images. Another may be exploiting a child directly. Another may be using fear, money, drugs, or emotional manipulation. Another may be moving victims through human trafficking networks. The public sees the final arrest count, but investigators see the connections. They see usernames, devices, accounts, IP addresses, financial trails, travel patterns, and repeated behavior. That is why the word pursuit matters. It suggests motion. It suggests pressure. It suggests that the FBI is trying to make predators feel that no hiding place is permanent. But there is another side to this story. Every major law enforcement announcement also raises a question of accountability. The public has a right to know not only that arrests were made, but how these operations are conducted, how victims are protected, how cases are built, and how officials separate public messaging from actual results. Because in America, law enforcement power is necessary, but it must also be watched. That tension is what makes this moment so important. Supporters of the operation see it as proof that federal law enforcement can still act decisively when the target is clear and the mission is urgent. Critics of federal law enforcement from different political camps may still ask whether big announcements are being used to shape a political narrative. Those two things can both exist at the same time. An operation can be serious and still deserve scrutiny. Arrests can matter and still require due process. Public safety can be urgent and still demand transparency. That is not weakness. That is how a constitutional system is supposed to work. But even with that caution, one fact is impossible to ignore. If the reported numbers are accurate, hundreds of alleged offenders were taken into custody, and hundreds of children were identified or located in a single month-long push. That does not happen by accident. It requires coordination. It requires intelligence. It requires investigators who are looking at patterns before the public ever sees a headline. And it also suggests something deeply uncomfortable. The problem was already there. The arrests did not create the crisis. They exposed it. Think about what that means. Across the country, law enforcement agencies were able to find enough active cases, suspects, victims, leads, and investigations to produce a nationwide result in just one concentrated operational sprint. That does not mean every case is the same. It does not mean every suspect is guilty. It does not mean every allegation will result in conviction. But it does mean investigators believed there was enough danger, enough evidence, and enough urgency to move. That is the part most people miss. The real warning is not only directed at predators, it is directed at the country. Because when more than 200 children are located in a single operation, the question becomes, how many are still unseen? That question hangs over the entire story. Operation Iron Pursuit was not the first effort of its kind. The FBI has pointed to a sequence of major crimes against children operations over the past year. Earlier operations resulted in large numbers of victims located and alleged offenders arrested. The Bureau framed Iron Pursuit as building on those previous efforts, expanding the pressure and keeping momentum. That timeline matters because it shows this was not presented as a one-day sweep designed for cameras. It was part of a broader operational pattern, a sprint, yes, but not an isolated sprint. A targeted effort tied to a continuing mission, and yet, the repetition raises an even harder question. If these operations keep producing major numbers, what does that tell us about the scale of the threat? That is where the story begins to shift, from enforcement to prevention. Arresting alleged offenders is essential. Rescuing or locating children is urgent. But no serious society can stop there. A serious society has to ask how children become vulnerable, how online platforms are used, how families miss warning signs, how schools detect or fail to detect distress, how agencies share information, and how quickly tips are acted on. Because predators do not operate only in dark alleys anymore. They operate through trust. They operate through fake identities. They operate through emotional dependency. They operate by convincing a child that nobody will believe them. They operate by turning secrecy into leverage. They operate by making victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. That is why these cases are so difficult. And that is why a child being located is not the end of the harm. It may be the beginning of recovery. It may be the beginning of testimony. It may be the beginning of years of trauma care. It may be the beginning of a legal process that forces a victim to revisit the worst moments of their life. So, when officials announce numbers, the public should remember what each number represents. Not a statistic, a child, a family, a case file, a digital trail, a person who may have been living with fear long before anyone knew their name. This is also why language matters. Officials may speak forcefully. Headlines may sound final, but in the American legal system, people arrested are alleged offenders unless and until proven guilty. That distinction is not a technicality. It protects the innocent, strengthens legitimate prosecutions, and prevents public anger from replacing evidence. But caution about due process does not reduce the seriousness of the allegations. If anything, it makes the stakes higher. Because when the crimes involve children, the public demand for justice is immediate. The pressure on investigators is intense. The pressure on prosecutors is enormous, and the margin for error must be as small as possible. A weak case can collapse. A mishandled investigation can traumatize victims further. A rushed announcement can create confusion. But a strong case, built carefully, can remove dangerous people from the streets and send a message that digital exploitation is not invisible. That is the balance. Urgency without recklessness, force without lawlessness, justice without shortcuts. And that balance is now part of the pressure facing Kash Patel's FBI. Patel's supporters see these operations as evidence of a more aggressive bureau. They argue that the FBI is refocusing on violent crime, child exploitation, trafficking, and threats that ordinary Americans feel directly. In that view, Operation Iron Pursuit is not just a law enforcement success. It is a statement of priorities. But opponents and skeptics may look at any FBI director operating in a heated political climate and ask a different question. Are these announcements being used to build public trust or to build a political brand? Are the numbers being presented with enough context? Are the cases being tracked beyond the press release? How many arrests lead to charges, plea agreements, convictions, or acquittals? What services are being provided to the children found? What is being done to prevent the next wave? Those questions are not attacks on the victims. They are the questions serious accountability requires. Because the American public has seen too many moments where institutions ask for trust without giving enough transparency. And the FBI, regardless of who leads it, carries a complicated history. It has done essential work. It has also faced criticism, scandal, politicization claims, and distrust from multiple sides of the political spectrum. That means every major announcement now lands in a country already divided over what federal power means. But child exploitation cuts through much of that division. There are few issues where the moral line is clearer. Children cannot defend themselves against adults, networks, traffickers, or digital predators. They depend on families, communities, schools, platforms, prosecutors, and law enforcement. When those systems fail, the harm is not abstract. It is permanent. That is why this operation landed with such force. Not because of politics alone, not because of one director alone, but because it touched something deeper. The fear that the country has built a digital world faster than it built the protections to defend children inside it. And that fear is not unreasonable. Parents today are told to monitor devices, but the platforms change constantly. They are told to watch for warning signs, but predators are skilled at hiding contact. They are told to report suspicious behavior, but many do not know what crosses the line until damage has already been done. Children are told not to talk to strangers, but strangers no longer look like strangers. They look like peers, fans, friends, mentors, romantic interests, gaming partners, or people offering attention at exactly the wrong moment. This is the battlefield law enforcement is describing, not a battlefield with borders, a battlefield of access. And once you understand that, the scale of Operation Iron Pursuit begins to look less like a single crackdown and more like a snapshot of a much larger conflict. The operation also reveals something about the way modern investigations work. These cases often require cooperation across agencies because the internet does not respect city lines, state lines, or even national borders. A suspect in one state may contact a child in another. A server may be overseas, a payment may move through a platform, an image may be copied thousands of times, a trafficking lead may begin with one tip and expand into multiple jurisdictions. That is why the involvement of all 56 FBI field offices is significant. It suggests a coordinated national push, not a patchwork response. It also means the operation likely depended on local knowledge as much as federal resources. Federal agencies can coordinate, but local officers, child advocacy groups, victim specialists, and prosecutors often understand the immediate realities on the ground, and that is where the public rarely looks. Behind every major operation are people who may never appear in the headline, analysts going through digital evidence, agents preparing warrants, victim specialists trying to reduce harm, local detectives following leads, prosecutors evaluating charges, forensic examiners handling devices, and community partners helping children after they are found. The announcement is one moment. The work is much longer, and the aftermath may determine whether Operation Iron Pursuit becomes a true turning point, or just another shocking headline that fades after the news cycle moves on. Because the brutal warning in this story is not only that predators can be arrested, the brutal warning is that America cannot arrest its way out of every vulnerability. Enforcement matters, but prevention, detection, education, platform responsibility, mental health support, family awareness, and victim services matter too. If a child is rescued but another child is targeted tomorrow, the work is not done. If a suspect is arrested but an online network remains active, the work is not done. If a headline produces outrage but no deeper awareness, the work is not done. This is where the pressure moment arrives, because the public wants a simple story. Good guys catch bad guys. Predators go to jail. Children are saved. The country moves on. But real life is not that clean. Some cases will move through court slowly. Some charges may change. Some defendants may fight the allegations. Some victims may not be ready to speak. Some families may never want publicity. Some evidence may be sealed. Some investigations may continue quietly long after the announcement, and that creates a difficult public tension. People want details, but too many details can harm victims or compromise cases. People want transparency, but investigations often require confidentiality. People want justice now, But due process takes time. That tension does not make the operation less serious. It makes it more serious, because if the cases are as grave as officials suggest, they must be handled with precision, not performance. And this is where the message from Patel's FBI becomes a test. A warning is powerful only if it is backed by sustained action. A major operation is meaningful only if it leads to real accountability. A press release can announce arrests, but courts determine outcomes. Agencies can locate children, but communities must help them heal. Officials can say predators will be pursued, but the country must decide whether it is willing to confront the conditions that allowed those predators to operate. That is the uncomfortable part. America often reacts strongly after the arrest. But predators thrive before the arrest, in the space where warning signs are missed, reports are delayed, platforms are slow, adults are distracted, and children are isolated. The most dangerous moment is not always the crime scene. Sometimes it is the private message that looks harmless. Sometimes it is the adult who seems too interested. Sometimes it is the child who suddenly becomes secretive, fearful, withdrawn, or unusually attached to someone online. Sometimes it is the image shared once that becomes a tool for blackmail. Sometimes it is the silence afterward. Operation Iron Pursuit drags that hidden world into public view, and it forces one question onto every parent, every official, every platform, and every community. What are you not seeing? That question is the real warning. Because the predators who were arrested were not the only people watching. Others were watching too. People who believe they are hidden. People who believe the system is too slow. People who believe children are easy targets. People who believe anonymity is protection. The FBI's message to them was direct. You can be found. But there is another audience for that message. The American people. The message to the public is more complicated. Do not assume safety because danger is invisible. Do not assume a child would always tell you. Do not assume exploitation looks like the old stereotypes. Do not assume that because a community appears quiet, nothing is happening underneath it. This is not a call for panic. Panic makes people careless. This is a call for attention. Attention is different. Attention asks better questions. Attention notices changes. Attention reports concerns. Attention demands responsible technology. Attention supports victims instead of shaming them. Attention understands that child exploitation is not a distant problem reserved for other families and other neighborhoods. It is a national problem because the networks are national, the platforms are national, and the consequences are national. That is why the number 350 matters. Not because it tells the whole story, because it proves there is a story much larger than the public usually sees. And the number 200 matters for an even deeper reason, because every child located represents both a rescue and a failure. A rescue because someone was found. A failure because they had to be found at all. That is not an attack on investigators. It is a statement about the scale of the threat. By the time law enforcement enters the story, harm may already have occurred. That is why the next phase matters so much. What happens after the announcement? Are victims protected from retaliation? Are families given support? Are digital networks dismantled? Are platforms pressured to cooperate faster? Are schools equipped to recognize exploitation? Are prosecutors given the resources to handle complex cases? Are the results tracked publicly in a responsible way? The announcement opens the door. The aftermath proves whether the system can walk through it. For Kash Patel, Operation Iron Pursuit is likely to be framed as one of the clearest examples of the FBI under his leadership projecting strength. But leadership in this kind of crisis is not measured only by strong language. It is measured by whether the agency can maintain credibility, protect victims, respect the legal process, and continue the work after the cameras leave. That is the standard. Not noise, not politics, results, transparency, and justice. And for the country, the standard is just as high. Outrage is easy. Awareness is harder. Prevention is harder still. It requires parents to have uncomfortable conversations. It requires platforms to act before scandal forces them. It requires schools and communities to take warning signs seriously. It requires prosecutors and investigators to have the resources they need. It requires the public to understand that child exploitation is not only a law enforcement issue, it is a societal vulnerability. That is the part that makes the warning brutal. The arrests show what law enforcement can do after predators have already moved. The question is what America is willing to do before they move again. Because somewhere, after this operation, another predator will tell themselves they are smarter. Another account will be created. Another message will be sent. Another child will be targeted. Another family may have no idea that danger has entered their home through a screen. And that is why this story cannot end with applause for a successful operation. It has to end with vigilance. Operation Iron Pursuit may have taken hundreds of alleged offenders off the street. It may have located more than 200 children. It may have sent a message across the country. But the deeper message is not comfortable. It is not clean. It is not finished. It says that the threat is real, the networks are active, and the country has been warned. The arrests are the headline. The unanswered question is the story. How many more children are still waiting for someone to notice?